Welcome to Season 8 of the award-winning Retail Tea Break podcast. My name is Melissa Moore, the Retail Advisor, and each week I'll be joined by industry experts, retailers and brands to dispel the myths, share their knowledge and give you an insight into the retail industry. Listen back to previous seasons on your favourite podcast platform, and while you're there, please do hit that follow button so you get to listen first every week. Watch us over on YouTube and subscribe to the Retail Advisor because you've no idea how useful it is to ensure that I can keep bringing you the content that you love. And remember, sharing is caring in the retail industry. Share an episode across any of your platforms with your network. And if you're on social media, tag me, Melissa Moore, and the Retail Tea Break podcast. In the meantime, grab that cup of tea, sit back and listen in to Season 8 of the Retail Tea Break podcast. A huge thank you before you go to our sponsor, International Retail Magazine. You'll find a link to the latest copy in the show notes. Each issue of International Retail is jam-packed with strategies that you can use immediately from the brightest minds in retail just for you. With the latest news and trends that are impacting your retail business, articles from retail leaders in the field, Q&As with global retail moguls, training tips for your frontline sales associates, and attention-grabbing cover stories from brands and CEOs that you know and love. Head over to irg-retail.com and subscribe today to your free copy of the latest issue of International Retail Magazine. Today I'm joined by a well-known retail industry expert, speaker and writer who has extensive experience and knowledge across the sector, particularly in areas such as retail technology, customer experience and emerging trends. In a retail career spanning 25 years, he held senior positions at Kingfisher and Superdrug before joining a number of leading technology partners to bring innovative solutions to retail businesses. In addition to publishing many retail blogs and articles, he's author of best-selling retail books, Harry Was Right All Along and Breathless, COVID, 2 Meters and Me. Today's guest is recognized by the industry as a thought leader across the globe and as a member of the exclusive global retail community, Rethink Retail. Andrew Busby, welcome to the Retail Tea Break podcast.
Melissa, thank you so much, and thank you for that intro. Yeah, it's kind of like you get to a point in your career, and you sort of look back and I think it applies to all of us that we kind of perhaps need to stop and think about actually what we've done over the years and what we've achieved and so forth. But yeah, I just love retail, which is why I get involved in all sorts of things. I love the variety of it.
I know, and do you know what? Both of us are so lucky to do what we do, but we're going to put a little spin on it today. So, to celebrate the 101st episode of the Retail Tea Break podcast, we thought we might do something a little different because, of course, you have this incredible insight and knowledge of the industry. So, we are bringing, for episode 101, we're bringing Room 101 to the Retail Tea Break podcast. I'm going to get you today, Andrew, to discuss some of your retail pet hates, we might call them politely, and maybe see do we consign some of those to Room 101 forever. But look, to kick us off in a really, really positive note, in the time that it takes to boil a kettle, which I am told is about 2 minutes, tell us a little bit more about you and your background in this incredible industry.
Well, I think you covered most of it, but yeah, you're right. I did a spell at Kingfisher and ran IT operations at Superdrug, and that kind of got me on my retail journey. And I do think, because in that time I did spend time on the shop floor, particularly at Christmas and so forth. And it is one of those things. It is a little bit Marmite. You either love it or, and actually just on that, I think that the retail industry does a particularly poor job of promoting itself as a great career. It is a fantastic industry. There is so much innovation in it. So yeah, it's kind of ferreting around in the back of my mind as to how to gather the right people together for that and try to promote it. But anyway, yes, so you're right. I mean, I think the writing came first. And that was really when I started my own company, Retail Reflections. That was about 10 years ago. I rebranded it a couple of years ago to Redline Retail. And I did a lot of writing. And from that, then the speaking. And I love doing that. I love getting up on stage. I've been fortunate enough to do that all around the world in places that I probably now wouldn't be able to go back to. Moscow is a standout.
Wow.
That was a great experience. And also, I'm told quite recently, Cape Town, not a great place to be visiting just at the moment, unfortunately. But yeah, the speaking and it does, I suppose, give you a bit of a a bit of a platform. And I think actually that kettle is probably boiled by now. So maybe I'll shut up and come back to those things
No, but
when
you
we
know
go
what? I'm
through them.
fascinated by that because I've obviously seen you on stage, I've seen you speak, and what I love as someone that's in the industry as well, I
Mm.
love the fact that you come full of insights. You've done your homework, you've drilled down the data. And what I've always heard you say makes so much sense, but it comes with such a gathering of knowledge that I always feel quite empowered listening to you.
Well, yeah, it's very kind of you. I mean, whether I've got all that insight and knowledge, but it's something actually that I've asked myself quite a number of times. In other words, what value am I bringing to the audience, let's say, when I'm speaking? And I think what it is that I spend my life, I mean, these people in the audience, if they're retailers, they are 100%, 110% heads down in their own business. They haven't got the time to be doing what I do, which is looking across the retail landscape and looking at what's going on, the trends, the challenges, the news, these sorts of things. So hopefully, I can curate that, if you like, and bring some of that insight and knowledge to them. I never pretended to be an expert in the way that the people working in a retail business, and I'll even include my daughter. I mean, she holds quite a senior position at one of the fashion retailers, and she knows more on her little finger about retail and retail ops than I ever will. But yeah, across the piece and the bigger picture, then hopefully I can bring that.
And you know what? Talking about an awful lot of those insights and trends and things, I'd love to get your outlook really as to where on earth we are now. We're midway through 2025. COVID's now 5 years ago. AI is absolutely everywhere. And we might come back to some of those later. But I
Mm.
suppose set the scene. Where do you think we are now, or maybe even where we're headed?
Oh gosh, it's such a difficult question. I think that this year will be much of the same that we're seeing at the moment. So, and of course, there's a number of different perspectives. Yeah, because of that, geopolitical uncertainty. However, retailers are incredibly adept at adapting. I've heard it so many times. It was, I think, yeah, John Lewis Media Day that I was at not so long ago. And this was it was post the last October's budget, and of course, all the measures which then kicked in April. And Peter Rees, the managing director, was asked about that and what he felt that would do for the business. And he said, look, you know, we will adapt. We don't know exactly. This was back in, I think, February. He said, we don't know exactly how that is going to impact. We've got a pretty good idea. We can't predict necessarily what the consumer is going to do, but we will adapt. And they do. Retailers do. And I think that's a great thing about this industry, that we see that time and time again. And perhaps we'll talk a little about adaptation a bit later.
Yeah, completely. And actually, even thinking about what you said there's so much that impacts this industry that we have no control over. We just deal with it. There are so many little things that we tend to forget that as an industry, we're really good at.
Yeah, and we're getting better and better. I almost try now when we're doing something like this to make sure that never utter those two letters, but I'm going to have to, AI, because it's such a transformational technology. So going back to what you said, AI, and I've heard it from a number of people say that probably the supply chain, and in particular inventory management, demand management, predictive forecasting, all these sorts of things, that is getting better and better and
Mm.
better, which is great. It's great for the retailer, it's great for the consumer, and it's also great for the planet because that will reduce wastage, and it's making sure that the right amount of stuff gets to where the consumer wants it. And that, after all, I mean, retail is the most complex, simple business you could ever imagine. Somebody said at a conference that I was at last week that retailers buy, move, and sell. That's the business model: buy, move, sell. And I thought, well, that's a great way of putting it. But of course, as you and I well know, it is infinitely complex and getting more so as retail businesses try to understand our fickle behavior as consumers. And I always say to people when they say, "Oh, well, yeah, I'm, the customer journey this and the customer journey that," and I'm like, "Well, good luck with that because you have no clue these days of what's going on in someone's head. It takes a psychologist to get to try to understand that. And just on that, and I say it's because my wife is a consumer psychologist, and she tears her hair out because for me as well, not just because she happens to be my wife, but it for me it's so blindingly obvious that every retail business should have a chief consumer psychologist on board to help them to work out, supporting the retail operations, supporting the marketing, supporting the commercial, supporting the merchandising, because they can give invaluable insights into how we operate and how we make our purchasing decisions.
I love that idea. I think it would be so useful. I think it's so important. But like an awful lot of things in retail, it almost feels like it takes hundreds of years for the
Yeah,
penny to drop sometimes. Because again,
yeah,
the spend has got to go elsewhere. The spend's got to go after the shiny new thing.
yeah.
It's funny, knowing and understanding our customers never seems to be that shiny new thing, but it's always something that we talk about. It's always in our, alluded to when we do our end of year accounts. It's always alluded to
Yep.
in our values and our mission statement, but we don't live it. We don't, as you say. But look, we can both start ranting because I think we're definitely
Oh, yes,
nearing
please.
that.
Yeah. I feel a
So,
I feel a good one coming on.
to kick us off, then, what is the one thing in retail? And you might have already mentioned it. I don't know. What's
Mm,
the one thing in retail that you would banish into room 101
mm.
forever and why?
Okay, so well, there's two things, but the one, and maybe in a minute we'll talk about the retail buzzword or phrase because they're both the same
Oh,
thing. So the first one would have to be omnichannel. I talk about this in a keynote that I do, and I say, and it's always good because it kind of I like to I like to be what I call healthily provocative. In other words, I want to stimulate debate. Doesn't matter if people disagree. In fact, it's great as long as people don't go away thinking, oh, well, that was just, more of the same. What I want them to do is to think, well, I hadn't thought about it like that. That's thought provoking. That's what I mean by provocative. But omnichannel, so as I think I looked this up. I thought, right, where on earth did this come from? Now, there are a few people who are credited, but the one that I found was a guy called Daryl Rigby. Now, Daryl Rigby at the time, back in 2011, and he still does works for Bain and Co. Now he coined the phrase in the Harvard Business Review, and I got hold of him through the wonders of LinkedIn, and asked him where on earth did this come from, and it was actually at the time, it was actually a fair call, trying to understand as we moved very rapidly then into far more of an online buying persona, if you like, and is trying to describe the physical and digital and so forth. But as we know, it really now is meaningless. And what I say to people is, well, when was the last time you heard anybody say, "I'm just popping out to do a bit of omni-channel"? And of course, you never have because we don't, because it's just nonsense. And it's something that we in the industry talk about. And we think that, and we very sagely point out, well, yeah, it's omni-channel. But thankfully, unified commerce is it's making way for unified commerce, which still isn't great, I'll be honest. But I'm not quite sure but I think the best way to describe it is that it's a bit like the film Everything Everywhere All at Once. That's what we want. We want stuff, whether it's a milkshake or a new t-shirt or whatever, which we're going to wear half a dozen times and then throw it in landfill, because that's what we do. But we want stuff whenever and wherever. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about AI helping enormously with that, which is great. So certainly I'd throw omnichannel in there. But I got another one, which is the buzzwords, which actually perhaps.
You're on a roll now. I'm slightly
Oh, I've got
concerned, but
yeah,
do
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Go
How
for
much
it.
time have we got? How
Rant.
much time have we got?
Keep
Now, the
going.
one that really, and even to say this word makes my hair angry. This is like running your nails down a blackboard over and over again. And it's the mix of digital and physical and fidgets or oh, it's. I mean, even my teeth. So, I mean, I even know people who've named their businesses Fidgetal something or other, and you just think, just what are you trying to say? Like omnichannel, totally meaningless. And we're guilty. I mean, I would even probably throw in seamless, seamless for goodness sake, frictionless. Now, frictionless, again, these things get abused because you hear frictionless time and time again. And I say, well, hold on a second. You're going down New Bond Street and you're thinking of buying maybe a handbag or an outfit, but you're talking well into four figures. Yeah. You bloody well want some friction when you go in there. You don't want to just dive in and out like you would on some other shopping journeys because you want advice. You want to be made to feel important. Yeah, it's a bit like buying a luxury item, say a watch. If you're in the market for a 10 grand watch, you're not going to buy that online because you want to feel it on your wrist to feel the weight of it because generally they will be weightier because there's a moving mechanism and so on and so forth, in your best Rolexes or whatever. So to say, oh, which I've heard so many people saying that they associate frictionless with a great customer experience. No, that's complete nonsense. Just think, and I suppose what my ask would be for people to think about what they're trying to say. So yeah, that's probably what I'd throw in room 101.
Okay, and breathe. Now I feel like you're getting this off your chest. And do you know what? I have to
Yeah.
say, and it's going to get me into shed loads of trouble because I'm sitting here like a nodding dog as you talk there. I completely agree. I hate the Omni thing. As you said, when that article was written, what are we
Yeah.
talking? 12, 13, 14 years ago?
Yeah.
Absolutely
No.
perfect, fine. But
Yeah.
we have come on so much more from then. As you said, we're multi-channel, and I don't care about the channels. I care about the fact that you need to be meeting your customers, you said, on their terms and their time and the way they want to shop. That's the simple of it. The frictionless thing I think is fascinating because if I
Hmm.
said to you, I want to kind of double park on yellow lines and run in for a pint of milk. Yeah, that's got
Yep.
to be frictionless. Get out of my way, make sure the milk
Yep.
is in stock. I want to pay, don't talk to me. I want to get out again. But as you said, if I'm going in to buy a watch, I almost want the red carpet rolled out. I want to be
Absolutely.
treated really
Yeah. Of
well.
course.
I want that to
Yeah.
be a really slow process. I want to feel really, really happy about the fact I'm shopping with you and that I want you to take your time, like Rowan Atkinson does that famous scene in Love Actually. I want you to wrap it with all the bells and whistles because I want to feel
Yes.
great. So I do. I think you're dead right. Retailers need to be really specific and think really specifically again about what their consumer wants out of that shopping journey, not just banding around these bleeding kind of jargon, these phrases that are just, they make no sense to anyone.
I don't think they do, and people within the industry pretend that they do. And before we sort of finish there, one more that I'll definitely for Room 101, which gets banded about by senior, CEOs, hear it all the time, and that's NPS, Net Promoter Score. What a load of bollocks that is. Now, I imagine that they use it because they want to show their investors and their shareholders, and they don't know any different, how wonderful the business is performing. But in actual fact, we know, they're going back to a little bit of, basic psychology. If you ask people a question, and this is the behavior gap in sustainability and so forth, people will give you the answer they want you to hear. So, and what gets me is that there are far more sophisticated ways of understanding. And in actual fact, it doesn't really matter, in a sense, what your customer is thinking about your business. It's how they're feeling in the moment, and how they're feeling about the experience. And there doesn't really seem to be much effort going into measuring that, if which they can do, go into people's, if you went into my, as you know, I'm on LinkedIn quite a lot, less so on the others. Facebook I use for a little bit because I'm old, and that's mainly friends and family. Instagram, if I'm on holiday, because I'm obviously saying my life is so much better than yours. Look at all these
Love
wonderful
it.
holiday pictures. Totally off Twitter because that's toxic. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, with you on that one.
So anyway, but the point being, if you were to say trawl the last 3 or 4, 5 years of my social media, you would know pretty much everything there is to know about me. And we know that that's possible now to do that. So I think how my customer is feeling is probably the most important metric in retail at the moment.
I completely agree. And it's interesting. The NPS score seemed to explode everywhere, kind of
Yeah,
around COVID time, I want to say, because this whole customer, and again, I am not dissing the customer experience experts in this world
yeah,
because I know a lot of them and they are
yeah, yeah.
incredible at what they do. However, at a more basic level, yeah, NPS has been bounded around. Everyone's talking about customer experience, but they're not living it. They're not actually, as you said, really digging into the depths of what that experience should be like. And as you said, I think it's really lame because a lot of those NPS scores are pulled from those god awful surveys. And again, who's actually spending the time filling in a survey via email when you get a million a day? There's only really two types of people, those that need to rant,
Yeah,
and those that kind of almost make their living out of sitting there with a cup of tea and filling in every single. That's not really good data. It's not accurate at
no.
all.
No, no, it's not. It's not. And we were talking about the new store or IKEA. Interesting point there, actually, which I made on the video I did when I went there on launch day. This is, I think, last year. I think it was at Shop Talk. He was the chairman of the holding company, and he was doing a fireside, and he said he used IKEA and IKEA in the same fireside. So there you go. We can pronounce it however the hell we like. But that's an interesting case in point because I can't imagine that that store is anything other than a vanity project
And
because
we must point out, we're talking about the new store in Oxford Street, the former Top
yeah,
Shop shop.
yeah, yeah.
That's quite hard to say.
Yes.
But this brand new, gorgeous store that they've built.
I mean, I wish them all and on launch day it all looked fantastic and so on and so forth. But I just feel that if you're in the West End, and I know they've got other centres, centres, they've got stores, one on Fifth Avenue, and one or two other cities or centres around the world, but none of them are Oxford Circus. You know, when you're there, you're there to maybe you're going to go down Carnaby Street, you're going to go to Soho, you're going to be going down Regent Street, New Bond Street, as I mentioned earlier, looking at luxury. You're having a day out or a half day out. Are you actually of a mindset to go looking for your next Billy bookcase? I'm not sure that you are, but time will tell. As I say, I wish them luck. I just think it's a curious use of 340 million, which I think is what it costs to get that thing up and running. So
That's mad. That is absolutely mad. But I'm going to move on swiftly because I
yeah,
think
yeah,
my mind's not made up about that store yet. And I was in there a few weeks ago.
yeah,
So
yeah,
time will tell, as you say. Okay, so we've done kind of physical, we've done a bit of customer.
yeah.
I obviously can't let you go without saying which piece of retail tech do you think is overhyped or certainly under delivers? Talk to me.
Mm. Well, the one that springs to mind, which nobody really talks about now, but 2, 3 years ago, it it was, everybody was talking about it at every conference I went to, and that's the metaverse.
Oh.
It's well, there you go. Oh, yeah, the metaverse. I seem to remember that, and it's kind of like, well, how's your metaverse project going? Now, I remember then listening to, and it was particularly interesting. It was particularly luxury that was investing in this thing called the metaverse. And I say it that way because I think it's fair to say that it's still being developed. It's kind of like a concept. But what I think the really interesting part about it is that the technology or the mix of technology, maybe not all of it, but that will return in some different guise. And one of the examples of that, which I think is really interesting, or maybe come back to, I'll jumping ahead of myself. I'll come back to in a minute what's looking to the future and so forth. But I think the metaverse is certainly, and the other I'd probably put in the same bucket, if you like, is AI. Now, I did a talk at an event in London last week, or week before, I think. Yeah, bit of a week ago. And I suggested I'd give it a bit of an alternative view about AI. So I did a bit of research, and there was a study which was conducted by the University of California last year, and it was a professor who's a child psychologist. She pitted AI against a group of 3 to 7 year olds and gave some basic tests. Now, one of them, the first one was basically about data and recall and so forth. And they had a large number of objects, but there were all the objects, you could link them together. So, for example, hammer and nail, they go together, right? Yeah. So all sorts of different objects. AI, yeah, absolutely, hands down, no problem at all with that. The next test, though, called for creativity and innovation. So again, a lot of objects, but they didn't have obvious links to each other. So the task was to draw a circle. The 3 to 7 year olds realized pretty quickly that one of the objects there was a teapot with a round bottom. So they put the teapot on the piece of paper and they drew around the bottom of it and they got their circle. In 85% of the instances, they got that. AI, only 8%.
Oh.
So, and I did recount this story in front of an audience full of people from ChatGPT, OpenAI.
Oh no.
But I got out alive, so that's. But it really interesting, isn't it, that AI and the message here, I think, is that look, just don't go just jumping in the deep end, both feet, and so on and so forth. Just look at because AI is brilliant for managing or rather interpreting using data. Yeah, AI is the engine. It's been said for many years, hasn't it? That the data is the new oil, etc., etc. I thought at one, as an aside, I thought at one stage a couple of years ago that I'd coined that phrase, and I found out that no, I hadn't. But I'd obviously dreamt about it and then thought, oh yeah. Anyway, so data is a new oil, yeah, and AI is the engine. So AI, is fantastic at managing, interpreting, using data. When it comes to creativity and innovation, humans. So I think that's quite an interesting. So that's why I would say the AI as well as metaverse in many ways is overhyped.
Oh, controversial. Well, I have to say, I think I'm gonna half put them in to room 101. So I might put them in and leave the door open
Oh, good. We found
because
something where we.
well, because
Ah,
again, I think, as you said, I think there are definite uses for various forms of AI. Obviously, we're
yeah,
seeing agentic coming at us hard and fast when it
yeah,
comes to
yeah,
solving retail problems. But again, you need that human connection too. And when
yeah.
it comes to the metaverse, can I say, big shout out to Orb Media, incredible Irish company, who are, I know for a fact, working with high-end luxury right now and doing some incredible things. I've seen the prototypes. I won't say any more because Kira will
Okay,
kill me,
good.
but there is good stuff coming. So we'll semi put them into room 101. So
Okay,
we can
all
agree to disagree on those
right.
ones. But look, we've obviously trashed various forms of tech there. Is there anything you think that is working right now? Because there is good tech. Both of us have worked with really good tech companies that are driving the industry forward. What do you think is working for retail right now?
Well, a couple of examples I'll give. And the first is a great French company, used to be known as SES, a Magatag, now Fusion Group.
Oh,
Well, I know you know,
yes.
yeah, and I think that they're doing some amazing things in store. Their background, their heritage is in electronic shelf-edge labels, but it goes much further than that now. And I got introduced to them a couple of years ago, and I went there. There's a great store on Belsize Park, almost directly opposite when you come out of the underground station. It's called Kavanagh's. Now, Kavanagh's is an Irish grocer, not a huge business, but this store is one of the most amazing. It's probably about, I don't know, 5,000 square feet, maybe 6,000. It's one of the most amazing stores I've ever set foot in. And it's pretty much a showcase for Fusion Group. It the electronic shelf edge labels, and before anybody jumps on and says, "Oh, so you mean dynamic pricing? That's going to be a bad thing because the prices always go up." Well, no, they don't. We should embrace that, and we should also get used to that because I think that ESLs are going to be commonplace within a few years' time.
100%. Yeah.
But also they've got a lot of other things where you might want to scan a QR code and then an LED will light up and that'll show you where the product is. And they can also with cameras monitor planogram compliance, stock outs, gaps, these sorts of things. It reduces wastage because they've got a far, far better handle on product life cycle and so forth. And they boast out of that store, I think 98, 99% availability.
Wow. Yeah.
Incredible. So I think that would be one. The other one, if I can give a shout out, so I'm as you know, I'm working at the moment with some guys who essentially it's a POS and self-checkout business, Box Tech. Not a huge company, but it's really opened my eyes to the fact that POS, and especially when you look at mobile POS and self-checkout, is now becoming embedded in store design. And I've heard people say that that now retailers that they're designing. I mean, if you look at the M&S store at Battersea, if you've been in there, it's almost as if they've designed the whole store around their POS and self checkout. So it's really now part of the whole. We talked about customer experience earlier. It's really part of that journey, part of the experience, and so yeah, that's another which I think is getting more and more sophisticated, particularly using AI to counter fraud, theft, shrinkage. So I have a view that there is no reason that I can see why we shouldn't end up within, I don't know, 5 years at virtually 100% self-service, self-checkout. Why would
I
we
love
be otherwise? Yeah.
And I love that because again, we're meeting the customer with their needs and their time, even if it's in a physical store. And
Yeah.
I'm loving seeing more and more examples of this. I have to say, you've mentioned M&S there. It would be remiss
Hmm.
of me not to kind of briefly talk about, and I think actually, and I want to say a positive way, not that the act was positive at all. This
Hmm.
cyber attack. Obviously, recently
Yeah.
we've seen M&S, we've seen Co-op, we've seen Harrods. There's loads of kind of retailers have been really impacted. It's more and more commonplace, Andrew, and it's a worry, but I suppose it's dealing with that issue that's the bigger picture.
Yeah, it is a wake-up call for all retailers. I think too often in retail, retailers will just kind of look over their shoulder and think, oh, well, glad that's happened to them and it's not me. Well, it could happen to anybody. In the case of M&S, I've been asked, what I thought about the reputational damage and so on. I mean, the financial damage I think is running at about 300 million at the moment.
Wow.
They just announced, that their full year results, which of course weren't affected by this, which were very, very positive.
Mm.
The businesses. Yeah, I think that's the thing. If this had hit M&S a number of years ago, when it wasn't doing quite as well as now, it might have had very different consequences because M&S are really riding the crest of a wave and a well-respected brand. And Stuart is doing a fantastic, his team are doing a fantastic job there. I fully expect that they'll recover, and I think that what I'd hope and what I expect that retailers will do would be. I mean, I spent the first 19 years of my career before I got into retail with Barclays Bank, and so I know all about IT. Well, I know all about living and working within a very, very secure IT department and security. And I would expect that those sort of banking financial disciplines will start to come into retail as a result of this.
And I think we'd all welcome it. I think whether it's on the retailer side or the shopper side, I think as we're doing more and more of these transactions, whatever it might be, if our retailers are holding more and more data on us, I think, yeah, the more secure they need to be, they want to be. I do believe that the shopper will row in there behind them indeed. But look, nearly coming to the end now. But before I let you go, are there any misconceptions in this crazy industry that we both kind of work in? Again, that you'd love to see vanish into room 101 before we close that door?
Misconceptions. I think we've probably covered most of them. Tell you why, it's not quite a misconception, but it's quite interesting for me. So you've got a smartphone, right? You may have
Hmm.
an iPhone, but if you have, too bad because there are better ones around. As I always say when
I'm an Android user. Let's put it
Ah,
up there.
great. Android, absolutely. But what I'm just I can't wait to see what comes next after the smartphone. So in other words, the misconception is that everything will stay the same and we're always going to have a smartphone. Well, if you remember back before 2007, which is when the first smartphone was introduced, we were all wedded to our Blackberries.
Oh, they were cool.
There you go. And Blackberries, if you remember, obviously had a physical keyboard, and nobody could conceive of anything other than that form factor. Now we've got the smartphone, and nobody can conceive of anything other than that. Well, I'm just waiting, whether it'll be Apple or somebody else. And the one thing that I think that could be the next is, and I'm fascinated by the Ray-Ban Meta glasses.
Oh,
And if you go into the EE store in Westfield, White City, their studio. So shout out to EE and my friend Asif. It's a fantastic store. He knows I like it so much there. But they've got the several examples of the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. So you can listen, you can take pictures, you can, I think, what else can you do? You can connect, you can use voice. So I'm just wondering whether that plus the sort of tech, but in a different guise that Apple put into the frankly ridiculous Apple Vision Pro, which I have tried, and it is again, I mean, it's so heavy. You couldn't wear that for more than half an hour. It's so heavy. So that sort of tech where we're looking at a hologram, a screen. Yeah, we've had head-up displays in cars for years and years. Why don't we have head-up displays? So in other words, people with either eyesight deficiency or hearing deficiencies. I was with somebody, a friend of mine, who his hearing when he had an infection, and he's got this brilliant. You can hardly see them. These hearing aids, but he controls the hearing aids from an app on his phone. And we were sat in a restaurant, and he said, "Oh, a couple over there, the other side of the restaurant," and he just adjusted his on his phone through the app, and he could hear their conversation perfectly. And I couldn't
No.
hear a thing about what they were. So I thought, wow, just think if you've got a combination of these Ray-Ban glasses and some expensive hearing aids, bionic man, bionic woman, we can do whatever we like.
Oh.
I think going back to what you are, I think the misconception is that everything is going to stay as it is, and we'll just get a slightly better iPhone with a better camera and this and that, and a few more apps and so on and so forth. No, it can't. Logic says that there will be something, and that for me is incredibly exciting. Whether it's going to be in my lifetime, I have no idea, but I'm sure there'll be something that will be following the smartphone because really it's getting a bit dated, a bit tired now.
And also, it needs to keep up with, and I suppose to bring it back to retail, it needs to keep up with the new way that we're shopping. We know
Yeah,
live shopping has gone through the roof. Everyone's shopping on TikTok shop. Like, we want
yeah,
our phones to bring these experiences to life now, an awful lot
exactly.
more than they are, because it is starting to feel a bit flat. So, I've no
Yeah,
doubt the next big thing is coming, and then we'll all wait about 10, 15 years before we jump on that bandwagon.
yeah,
But look, a
totally.
final question then before we close the door on room 101, because I'm certainly not going to put this in there. What's coming up next for you? What's the next new exciting, I suppose, project for you, but also in the world of retail?
Well, yeah, I'm continuing the speaking. The writing, I'll have you're kind enough to mention the two books. Well, actually, there's a third because Breathless spans two volumes. So that was the
Oh,
diary that I kept throughout COVID. So it was 422 days, ran from March 2020 to May 21, and I couldn't get it all into one volume. It would have been nearly 1,000 pages. So the manuscript is all ready to go. I've just got to get it formatted. So Breathless Volume 2 will be coming out shortly.
fantastic.
So hopefully people, I mean, all that I'm so heartened because the people who've read Volume 1 all say the same thing, that it's like it's great because it is a diary, and it's a diary of the times and what went on. And of course, a lot of what went on we've forgotten about. And even
Mm.
when I proofread it, I was thinking, I wrote it, but I was thinking, wow, yes, of course, there's this and that and the other. And it's fascinating. So that'll be coming out soon. I'm carrying on my writing, which again I'm very fortunate to be able to do with Fortune, and looking forward to really putting Box Tech on the map. We're like I say, we're a small company. They love punching above their weight. Got some fantastic customers, and so that's exciting because it's a journey that I'm on with them, helping them to raise brand awareness and get more people through the door. So yeah, looking forward to it.
That's a lovely way to end today. Yeah, so well done for all the work you're doing. And very excited now to read volume two of the new book. So that will be a great one to look out for.
Oh,
So look,
and I should
oh,
add, sorry, yes. So could I forget this because I'm meeting with them next week. So as of a couple of weeks ago, I became an ambassador for the Bookmark charity. Bookmark are a fantastic charity. They support primary school children with their reading. So typically in less affluent areas and so forth, I think across the country there's something like over 200,000 primary school children who leave primary school with very, very limited reading skills. And what Bookmark do is they have volunteers. I'm an ambassador, so I'm spreading the word within retail because retailers can sign up to support the charity, whether through financially or with volunteers, to basically sit down either in person or like this online and help these children from the more deprived areas with their reading. And the thing that I love about it is it's really bringing the joy of reading and the joy of books to these children's lives. And so, yeah, that's the one thing I'm really looking forward to getting involved in this year.
That's gorgeous, Andrew. And it's so important as well. It really is. So it's great to hear the work you're doing to support them. But look, if you've enjoyed today's episode, please do like and share it from any of the podcast platforms with your network. And if you're on social media, do tag me, Melissa Moore, and the Retail Tea Break podcast. Listen back to previous episodes on your favorite podcast platform. And while you're there, please do hit that follow button so that you get to listen first every week. Watch us over on YouTube and subscribe to the Retail Advisor because you've no idea how useful it is to ensure that I can keep bringing you the content that you love. Connect with myself and Andrew, of course, over on LinkedIn for lots of videos and content from him. Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much, Melissa. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.